If you're watching this video, it's because you perceive yourself to be open enough to consider things, or somebody has thought that you were that and shared this with you. But this video is a fifth video in a series on opening our hearts and considering the issues of race, and they build upon each other. So if you haven't watched the previous four videos, I encourage you to please do that before you jump into this fifth video, because they will be helpful in reflecting through those issues. Now, we've covered the idea of resistance and avoidance, how we tend to resist when the idea of racism and issues surface, especially parts of the debate about systemic racism and Black Lives Matter. We tend to resist openly exploring the issues without asserting ourselves on our viewpoints first. And sometimes we're tempted to reject those ideas without really exploring whether or not they exist. And we want to know in our open heart, why is our heart doing that? Why are we resisting and avoiding? Not are the ideas true, but just why are we resistant to considering those things? Then we talked about the idea of diminishing the severity of the issue, and again, not winning the debate on whether or not it's severe, but asking ourselves the question, why don't we want to explore the idea that it is severe? Why do we treat it as less of a problem? Then we talked about resources, where I'm getting my information and how I need to just be skeptical with every bit of information it's coming from, and I need to make sure I'm getting information from both sides thoroughly in order to get enough information to make wise choices in this arena. Now, today, what I want to talk about is going deeper with things, because I think sometimes we try to make issues a little too simple. An example of that is the philosophical question of, is it wrong to take a human life? On the surface, the answer would likely be yes, it is wrong to take human life. However, if you were to explore that further, what about an act of warfare? What about capital punishment? What if someone's a threat? And you might find a context, and you look deeper, in which you don't say that it's always wrong to take human life. Not taking a side with that either, just saying that just simply the question, is it wrong to take human life, yes or no, is sometimes not a simple question to answer. Jesus was often posed with difficult questions, like, Jesus, is it okay for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, the Pharisees knew well that that was a complex question, that if Jesus answered one side or the other was going to create complications. And so there was a lot to answer there. And while in that context, there was a problem with paying taxes, there was also a problem with not paying taxes. And so Jesus had to find a way to wisely work through that issue by digging deeper. He also ran into conflict with the Pharisees over the issue of how to observe the Sabbath. And how you observe the Sabbath was a deeper issue than just simply, should I do anything on the Sabbath day? And Jesus pushed them to evaluate more deeply the issues of the Sabbath. And they struggle with that because they tried to make things simplistic. And some things are simple and clear, and other things are not. So when we dive into this race issue, I was once challenged to consider asking more than one why. So there are times that people are pushing against the idea that there is systemic racism and that there is a big racism problem in our country, and that there are other causes to Black people in our country being on the outside with different things. And they'll raise issues like Black on Black crime. They'll raise issues of the absent father in the African American family as the cause, poor education as the cause, And they will say it's not racism as to why uh, there's a discrepancy in the percentage of African Americans that get adequate jobs, that get high profile jobs, that get higher education, that do well in higher education, that there's a discrepancy there for African Americans, and that the reason is not because of racism, is what people will say, and they'll say it's these other issues. For me, I want to ask the question, so we say it's the absent father. Well, then why is the father absent? That's another question I want to ask. Why is the father absent in the African American family? Why do they perform more poorly in academics? Why do they? Because it might not be as simple as that's why they're having a hard time getting jobs, because their performance academically is lower. But is it possible that racism is playing a role in their academic outcomes? So an example would be if there is a subconscious view that African Americans are less intelligent or African Americans are trouble, I should be suspicious of them, and I'm a teacher, is it not possible that that perception can influence the academic outcome of that African American student in my class? And if this issue is more prevalent than we think, then how could it not be that a lot of African Americans might be underperforming, if those statistics are even true, might be underperforming because of racism in the teachers and the administration within our schools, and it's affecting the outcomes of their academics. What about crime? And I attached that Phil Vischer video to, I think, video 2, maybe video 3. Then, and some of what I'm saying here is that kind of concept, in that we might say African Americans commit more crimes, or they commit a larger percentage of crimes compared to their percentage of the makeup of society. But I would want to ask a question, why do they commit more crimes? Or why are they convicted of more crimes? If there are potentially police officers and judges and the people that are making the decisions on who gets arrested, who gets convicted, that I have the concept in my head subconsciously that Black people are trouble and criminals and those sort of things, then isn't it possible that people might end up being wrongfully convicted, arrested and not acquitted, or not given much leniency because they're Black, because of the perception that I have, and therefore increasing the amount of people that are convicted of crimes? And where if I'm white, I might not get pulled over because of a broken taillight, but if I'm Black, I am, and that leads to me being caught with drugs on me, where a white person with drugs on them is not caught because they're not pulled over with a taillight, and then vigorously questioned because I'm not perceived as suspicious. So isn't it possible that if we ask deeper questions, so again, like I said, just saying these surface things of, well, they perform lower in education or academically, and they commit more crimes, they get convicted more often. Why is that? Is it possible that there is still racism at the core cause of that creates these other scenarios in which I could try to, on the surface, point the finger to avoid dealing with that there is a problem of racism in our country? Think through the history of this. So, African Americans were enslaved in our country. Then they were released into a society that was heavily racist and was heavily upset with that slavery ended, and was heavily upset with that there is an increase of population, of competitiveness for the resources that are out there. And so there was, and there was no teaching, no show helping them back into to acclimate into society. And so they had to whole lives living in slavery, now how to figure out how to live with freedom. That led to all kinds of poverty. That led to all kinds of poor scenarios and scenarios in which many people were pressed into circumstances in which it's either crime or no resources at all. And so they were in bad situations. And from the 1860s all the way to the 1960s, there was major limitations on letting African Americans get into the game. Limits on education, limits on employment, limits on voting even, was standing in the way. And so they had to work through trying to figure out how to function in a society that wouldn't let them function. And then you finally get to the 1960s and the civil rights movement, and we get some things changed, but still, the racial bias didn't just leave everybody's hearts because the law said you can't do that. And so we still find a way to cheat the system. And besides, let's say it all got perfect in the 1960s. Are there not ramifications as to where now African Americans were given a major uphill climb? And if they were, because of those scenarios, dealing with being criminalized more often, and so therefore the public perception is that they're criminal, having poorer academic outcomes, because again of the prejudice and the whole history that was there, now the perception is that they are not intelligent. And so those things that are sitting inside of people's minds in a subconscious way are present still today and still influencing those outcomes. And so if I still perceive a criminal less than intelligent, that's still impacting the outcome. And they have this huge uphill climb. And I've heard people say, well, this whole black on black crime, and they're committing crimes and they're doing this stuff that's adding to the reputation of their race. And so they just need to change the perception then. They need to do a PR battle. But do you understand that we are the white culture that gave them the uphill climb and then are telling them you just need to work harder to climb up that uphill battle? Is that really fair? Is that really okay to do? And sometimes I hear people say about the issue of white guilt that, well, you're just trying to make us all feel guilty and feel bad because we're white and because that's back in the past of our history. Maybe some people are trying to do that. But because that's there, does that mean that I can't thoroughly evaluate what's happening here and hopefully right a wrong that is right before me, present day? Okay, so I don't need to just feel overly guilty that slavery happened in our country, but can't I just acknowledge that has every bit to do with the uphill climb that is still present today? I don't have to feel guilty because there was problems with civil rights for African Americans in our past, though I should acknowledge that was wrong. That was a problem that should have never happened. And again, acknowledge that is likely contributing to the present circumstances. That there are still possibly scenarios that people, because of subconscious racial viewpoints, are creating a climate that causes an uphill climb still today. The past issues plus the present thinking is still impacting that. And I don't need to feel guilty in the sense of just shaming myself. But don't we have an obligation to care for our fellow man? Don't we have an obligation to right wrongs? Don't we have an obligation to say, you know what? There's an issue here. And instead of just hiding behind we don't need to have white guilt, we don't feel guilty because we're white, I think that sometimes we're avoiding looking deeply into this. And so I encourage you, keep looking deeply. When people throw out statistics, here's an example. I actually had a conversation with someone that said that let's say African Americans commit 40% of the crime, which means they're committing less than whites are. However, let's say they're only 15% of the population. Let's even give it 20. And so they're committing a disproportionate amount of crimes. However, and he thought that meant that the vast majority of people, of African Americans, are criminals that commit crimes, or 40% of African Americans commit crime, and so therefore he could be suspicious of all African Americans because the majority, or because 40% of African Americans have been convicted of crime. Well, first of all, if I have 100 people that commit crime and 40 of them were African American, but I have 1,000 African Americans, then a very small percentage of African Americans actually committed crime. So you might have a large percentage of the crime committed by a race, but that doesn't mean a large percentage of that race has committed crimes. And so am I really going to hold 60, 70% of a race's population accountable for the actions of 20 and 30%? Is that really fair? I'm going to see you as possibly a criminal because you're in that race that has 30% of that race committing crime. Is that really reasonable to do that? And again, I want to ask deeper questions. Why? Why is that statistic there? Why is it that African Americans are convicted of a disproportionate amount of crimes? Is it because they're criminal? Or is it because there are poor circumstances that are leading to that? So again, I'm pleading with you, ask why, and then ask why again, and then ask why again. Don't just be tempted to stay at the surface where everything seems to fall in line for you. Keep asking why. Keep being a skeptic, and I bet that you might see more than you think you will, and I bet that you'll see more than you want to. Ask why. If this video is helpful to you, again, I don't really want to push this out there to people who aren't willing to openly consider this. If you feel like there's someone you know that might enjoy openly considering the thoughts here, then please share, like, comment on this video with others or the whole series. Thank you.